I just think people are running from issues, and I don't think in this business you're supposed to run from issues. And the fact that everybody's running from the big elephant in the room involving the WNBA and the latest with Coach Stephanie White of the Indiana Fever going on a little tirade during a post-game press conference because people were accusing her of not supporting her player after Sophie Cunningham was essentially,
There is a moment in every institutional collapse where the people in charge stop listening to the people who matter most. And when that moment arrives, it doesn't quietly fade away. It explodes, it spreads, and it takes everything with it. What is unfolding inside the Indiana Fever organization right now is not a simple sports controversy. It is not a bad week of press coverage that will blow over by the weekend. What we are witnessing in real time is a full-scale leadership meltdown, a catastrophic breakdown in the relationship between a franchise and the fans who fund it, and a head coach who walked straight into the fire and somehow decided to pour gasoline on herself. A coach who told her own paying customers to go to hell. A coach who cried on camera after the Backlash hit. A coach whose front office looked at all of that chaos and said, yeah, we're keeping her. The Indiana Fever are trapped inside a crisis of their own making, and the walls are closing in faster than anyone in that front office seems to realize. But to understand exactly how we got here, we have to go back to where this all ignited. Because the spark that started this inferno came from a single game, a single foul, and a single jaw-dropping decision by Stephanie White that nobody saw coming. The Indiana Fever and the Chicago Sky were locked in a highly physical and intensely competitive matchup, the kind of game where every call matters and every moment of aggression gets scrutinized under a microscope. It was during this game that Sky guard DiJonai Carrington was ejected for a flagrant 2 foul after she violently struck Fever guard Sophie Cunningham in the head and neck area. It was a brutal hit. It was the kind of contact that sends a message, and not a subtle one. In a functioning organizational environment, the response from the head coach is immediate and unambiguous. You stand at that podium and you go to war for your player. You make it crystal clear that physical intimidation against your roster will not be ignored, will not be minimized, and will absolutely not be tolerated. You send that message to the league, to the opponent, and most importantly, to your own team. You show them that when something goes wrong on that court, the person standing on the sideline has their back. That is the job. That is the baseline expectation, and that is exactly what Stephanie White failed to deliver. Instead of defending Cunningham, instead of condemning the dangerous hit that got an opponent thrown out of the game, White went in the complete opposite direction. She defended Carrington. She stood at the podium and openly stated that she did not oppose the hard foul. She offered public cover to the very player who had just put one of her own athletes at risk. And here is the part that made the backlash even more explosive. White had previously coached Carrington at the Connecticut Sun. This was not a neutral assessment from an objective observer. This was a coach choosing her former player over her current one, in public, in front of cameras, with thousands of fans watching. And the moment those words left her mouth, the clock started ticking. The fan base did not need a second viewing to process what had just happened. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. A head coach had just watched her own player take a brutal, flagrant shot to the neck, and her first public instinct was to validate the aggressor. The reaction online was immediate, overwhelming, and ferocious. When the sheer volume of the backlash started crashing down on her, White attempted to pump the brakes. She tried to walk back her initial comments, claiming that she had not clearly seen the Carrington foul in real time before speaking. She insisted that she did not have the benefit of watching the replay over and over again when she first made those statements. She framed it as a case of incomplete information rather than a revealing moment of loyalty misplaced. But the fans were not buying a single syllable of it.
Blitz today. And I knew she would. As soon as that came out of her mouth, I was like, oh, she's going to get destroyed. She thinks whatever backlash she's been seeing was an issue. She hadn't seen nothing yet. You're telling your paying customer to go to hell. And you can't try to backtrack this now. That's exactly what you did.
And honestly, can you blame them? Because when you are standing at a podium in a professional sports setting, when you are the head coach of one of the most scrutinized franchises in the entire league at this particular moment in WNBA history, you do not publicly defend the player who just fouled your guard out of the building and then claim it was all a misunderstanding of optics. That explanation does not hold up. It did not hold up then, and it does not hold up now. The trust had already been fractured. The narrative was already formed, and in the age of social media, where clips circulate within minutes and commentary floods in from every direction simultaneously, there is no walking back a statement like that once it has already been absorbed by millions of viewers. White had been caught. Whether the intent was malicious or genuinely misguided, the perception had already hardened into concrete. She had chosen the wrong side. And instead of accepting that reality and navigating it with any level of strategic calm, she did something that turned a bad situation into an absolute catastrophe. She escalated. What Stephanie White delivered before the Fever's next game was not a press conference in any traditional sense of the term. It was a declaration. It was a detonation. It was a moment that will be studied in sports management programs for years as the textbook example of how not to handle a public relations crisis when your organization is already sitting on a powder keg. She did not walk in composed. She did not walk in measured. She walked in like someone who had been marinating in rage for 48 hours and had reached the exact moment where none of the internal filters were working anymore. She pounded her fist on the table multiple times. She raised her voice. She pushed back aggressively against every journalist and critic who had questioned her handling of the Sophie Cunningham situation. She flat out refused to take questions from the media in the room, an extraordinary and stunning departure from the basic obligations of a professional press conference. And then, just when you thought she had already said the most damaging thing she could possibly say in that setting, she said it. She told her critics to go to hell. Not indirectly, not through carefully chosen language designed to maintain plausible deniability. She said it out loud at a podium as the head coach of a franchise that depends on ticket sales, merchandise revenue, and broadcast viewership to survive financially. She looked into the metaphorical face of the public that fills those seats and funds those paychecks and told them to go to hell. There is a rule in professional sports that every coach, executive, and front office employee understands from the moment they enter this business. You do not bite the hand that feeds you. You simply do not do it. The fans are not just an audience. They are the economic infrastructure of the entire operation. Without them buying tickets, without them streaming the games, without them purchasing the merchandise and engaging with the content, there is no league, there is no franchise, there is no contract. And Stephanie White, in one explosive and emotionally unhinged moment, took all of that institutional knowledge and threw it straight out the window. The fallout was instant, and it was severe in ways that the front office clearly had not anticipated. The booing started before the game even tipped off. Inside the very arena where Stephanie White is supposed to be a commanding, respected presence on the sideline, sections of her own home crowd turned on her with a ferocity that cut through every attempt at noise management and narrative control. The boos were not polite. They were not isolated to a small, disgruntled section of the upper deck. They echoed through the building with the kind of unified energy that communicates something unmistakable, that a significant portion of the paying fan base had officially withdrawn their support and wanted everyone in that building to know it. The environment was hostile. The optics were devastating. And what made it even more extraordinary was the identity of the crowd delivering this verdict. These were Indiana Fever fans. These were the people who were supposed to be on this team's side. These were the people who had bought into the promise of this roster, who had shown up excited and invested in what the Fever could accomplish this season. And now they were using their voices, their money, and their presence inside that arena to send the loudest possible message to the leadership of their own franchise. Online, the reaction had already metastasized into something that went far beyond sports commentary. The comment sections across every major platform became a relentless, high-volume demand for accountability. Fans were not venting, they were organizing. They were calling for White's termination in unified, persistent, and very public waves. And then the situation took a turn that officially elevated it from a sports controversy to a full-scale institutional and political crisis. Indiana's own lieutenant governor stepped directly into the conversation and publicly called for Stephanie White to be fired. Let that land for a moment. An elected government official representing the state of Indiana decided that what was happening inside the Fever organization had escalated to a point where it warranted their direct public commentary. This was no longer contained within the sports media ecosystem. This had bled into the political sphere. The pressure coming from every direction, the fans, the media, the political figures, was creating a scenario where the front office was going to have to respond. The only question was how they were going to respond, and the answer they chose was one that nobody watching this situation clearly could have predicted. When the dust should have been settling, when the rational organizational response would have been to assess the damage and make a decisive move to protect the brand's long-term commercial viability, the Indiana Fever's front office did something extraordinary. They doubled down. Team president Kelly Krakoff stepped into the public arena and released a statement that could not have been more unambiguous in its intent. According to Krakoff, Stephanie White had done a tremendous job keeping the team focused and united under the brightest spotlight the league has ever seen. The statement made it explicitly clear White had the full support of the organization's leadership, full stop. No qualifications, no acknowledgement of the legitimate grievances pouring in from the fan base, no language that even gestured toward the possibility that perhaps the head coach had made some communication errors worth reflecting on. Just a wall of institutional protection built around a coach who had just told the public to go to hell. The disconnect between what was happening in the stands and what was being communicated from the executive offices had never been more visible or more jarring. The fans in that arena were booing their own coach before the game started, and the people running the franchise were issuing statements of full confidence. A politician representing the state was calling for a firing, and the team president was celebrating the job being done. These two realities existed in the same moment, in the same organization, and the chasm between them was so wide and so deep that it raised serious questions about whether anyone in that front office was actually paying attention to what was happening on the ground. This is where the situation transcends the usual sports drama narrative, because this is no longer simply about whether Stephanie White was right or wrong in defending Carrington. This is about an organization that appears to be making decisions based on internal loyalty rather than external accountability. This is about a leadership structure that is actively choosing to ignore the commercial and reputational damage being done to the franchise in real time, and the fans are watching every single move being made, and they are not forgetting it.
The front office bet the financial future of this franchise on a coach who just went to war with its own consumer base. That is not a small gamble. That is an institutional decision with consequences that will ripple forward long after this particular news cycle fades. Through all of this chaos, through all of the press conference explosions and the arena booing and the political commentary and the front office statements, there is one person inside this situation who deserves a massive amount of credit for navigating an impossible position with remarkable composure. Caitlyn Clark did not start this fire. She did not pour any fuel on it. And when she was inevitably pulled into the orbit of the controversy, she handled it with a level of maturity and professionalism that stood in sharp contrast to virtually everything happening around her. Clark stepped into the space between the warring sides and tried to function as a bridge. She revealed that she had spoken privately with White, and she encouraged the public perspective that coaches are human beings navigating enormous pressure, not robots immune to emotion or error. She was trying to lower the temperature. She was trying to remind everyone that there is a team inside all of this noise that still has games to play, a season to compete in, and goals that exist beyond the drama consuming the headlines. But here is the uncomfortable truth about that situation. You should never be in a position where your franchise cornerstone, the generational talent whose presence is largely responsible for the explosion in your team's commercial profile and ticket demand, has to step in and function as a public relations mediator for a crisis created entirely by leadership decisions. That is not Caitlyn Clark's job. That is not what she was brought into this league to do, and the fact that she was placed in that position at all is a damning indictment of how badly the organizational management of this situation has been handled from the very beginning. Her words were gracious, her intent was clearly genuine, but supportive words from a star player cannot unwind the institutional damage that has already been done. They cannot walk back the "go to hell" statement. They cannot unring the bell of a coach pounding her fist on a table and refusing to answer journalist questions. They cannot erase the image of a home crowd booing their own head coach before tip-off. The goodwill that Clark generates through her talent and her composure is being systematically consumed by a leadership crisis she had absolutely nothing to do with creating. And that is a genuinely unsustainable dynamic for any organization hoping to build something meaningful and lasting around one of the most marketable athletes in women's sports history. After the backlash from the press conference reached levels that even the most insulated front office could not completely ignore, Stephanie White attempted a pivot. The table-pounding fury made way for a different kind of performance. She tried to humanize herself. She leaned into emotion, claiming she is only human, insisting that love will win, projecting an image of a coach who was wounded by the attacks and was drawing strength from the unity of her team. She wanted the narrative to shift from coach who told fans to go to hell to coach who is being unfairly persecuted and is rising above it with grace. The fans were not impressed. They were not moved, and they were certainly not fooled. The emotional display was almost universally labeled across fan communities and commentary platforms as nothing more than a calculated PR maneuver. The term "fake tears" started circulating almost immediately, spreading with the same viral speed that the original press conference clip had. And the reason that label gained so much traction so quickly was because of sequencing. Because when you have just stood at a public podium and told your critics to go to hell, and then the next time cameras find you, you are presenting yourself as a vulnerable, compassionate figure who leads with love and grace, the credibility gap between those two presentations is simply too enormous to bridge. The audience had already seen who showed up at that first podium, and they were not going to be persuaded that the second version was the authentic one.
This is the core failure of the pivot strategy. You cannot weaponize emotion as a shield after you have already weaponized aggression as a sword. The public does not reset its perception simply because you want it to. The era where media gatekeepers could control the narrative and protect powerful figures from the consequences of their own behavior is over. The audience has the receipts, they have the clips, they have the timestamps, and they are not going anywhere. Fans are demanding accountability. Not an emotional performance, not a carefully choreographed moment of vulnerability designed to generate sympathy from commentators who have historically been protective of the league's authority figures. Real accountability, real acknowledgement of the damage done, real consequences for the choices made. And right now, none of those things are materializing from within the Indiana Fever organization. Here is the reality that no statement of full organizational support can change. Here is the truth that no amount of institutional loyalty can override indefinitely. Professional sports franchises exist within a commercial ecosystem. They are not immune to market forces. They cannot absorb unlimited reputational damage and expect the revenue streams to remain intact. The fans are not passive audience to be managed. They are the economic engine that makes this entire operation function.
And right now, the Indiana Fever's economic engine is making some very loud and very alarming sounds. The WNBA is at a historically significant moment. The league is experiencing a surge in commercial visibility, media rights valuations, and mainstream cultural relevance unlike anything it has seen before. New audiences are arriving, corporate investment is increasing, the infrastructure for genuine long-term growth is finally starting to materialize in a meaningful way. And the Indiana Fever, thanks largely to the presence of Caitlyn Clark, are positioned at the absolute center of that growth story. The spotlight on this franchise is brighter than it has ever been. Every decision made inside this organization is being watched, analyzed, and debated by an audience that extends far beyond traditional WNBA viewership. This is not the moment to be making decisions that alienate the consumer base. This is not the moment to be drawing lines in the sand around a coach who just delivered one of the most self-destructive press conferences in recent sports memory. This is the moment to be thinking about long-term brand equity, about the relationship between the franchise and the public, about what kind of institutional culture you want attached to the organization at the exact moment the entire sports world is paying attention. The front office is gambling with that future, and the bet they are making is not a conservative one. The fans booing in that arena are not going to forget. The lieutenant governor who called for White's firing is not going to retract that statement. The comment sections that have transformed into relentless demands for accountability are not going to suddenly moderate themselves because the team president released a statement of support. The pressure is not dissipating, it is compressing. And compressed pressure in institutional environments that refuse to release it through legitimate channels always finds another way out. It always does. The Indiana Fever organization is operating on borrowed time. They have made their choice. They have drawn their line. And now the franchise is going to have to live inside the consequences of that choice while playing games in an arena where a meaningful portion of their own home crowd has already decided where their patience ends. That is not a sustainable environment for a head coach, for a team, or for a franchise trying to capitalize on the most important commercial moment in its history.
The question is not whether the pressure will force a resolution. The question is how much further this has to fracture before the people making the decisions inside that organization finally look up from the protection of their institutional bubble and accept what is obvious to everyone watching from the outside. Coaches have survived worse controversies. Franchises have recovered from deeper crises. But recovery requires acknowledgement. It requires some form of accountability. It requires leadership that is capable of prioritizing the health of the organization over the comfort of protecting one person from the consequences of their own choices. Right now, none of that is coming from Indianapolis. And every day that passes without it is another day the Indiana Fever spend mortgaging their future against a debt that is growing larger by the hour. What happens next is on them, but the fans have already made their position perfectly clear. And in professional sports, when the people buying the tickets stop believing in what they are being sold, the product does not survive on institutional loyalty alone. It never does.